Hi, Math 10C students. Today we're going to work on the lesson for 6.4, which is the slope-intercept form of the equation for a linear function. Now we are skipping over 6.3 as it is a math lab, and I know that not all of you necessarily have a graphing calculator or access to graphing software at home. So we're going to go through this lesson, and then in tomorrow's lesson, 6.4, it's kind of a revisited version of it, with a little bit more complex of questions. We'll get into some of the topics that were touched on in 6.3. So again, for today, we're going to be looking at the graph of a line, and we're going to relate that to its equation in something called slope-intercept form. So an equation of a line that is not vertical, it can be written in something called slope-intercept form. So this is included on your formula sheet as well, this form. Slope-intercept form of a line, or of the equation of a line, is basically showing the line in such a way that from the formula we are able to gather what our slope is, as well as our y-intercept. So slope-intercept form is when an equation is written in this form. So y equals mx plus b. So in this case, the m represents the slope of the line, and b represents the y-intercept. So remember, the y-intercept is at the point in which x is equal to 0 and our y value is equal to some number. Okay, so whatever happens to be in this form. So again, m is your slope. So you're given your slope directly in this formula, and you're also given your y-intercept directly in this formula. Now, we had worked with equations in this form earlier in the 5.7 and later lessons, and we used this form of the equation actually to solve for y-intercept and to solve for x-intercept. But now I'm showing you that just simply by having this equation, we can figure out what the y-intercept is without having to plug any numbers in at all. So let's take a look at an example of this. So this first example here says the line has a slope of -7/4 and a y-intercept of 5. So they're asking us to write an equation for this line. So remember, slope is also equal to the letter m, and our y-intercept is equal to the letter b. So if we look at that form up there, y equals mx plus b, we can just plug in these numbers that we were given into the values of m and into the values of b. So that means that y equals, our slope is -7/4 x, so we keep the x and the y there, plus, in this case it is a positive because it's a positive 5. Now if this was a -5, instead of writing +5, I would write -5. But since this is a positive, I write +5. And if we look below, this can verify that yes, that is the proper equation for this y-intercept form. So let's try these checks at the bottom. It says a line has a slope of 1/2 and a y-intercept of -3. Circle the correct equation. So remember, we're looking for an m value of 1/2 and a b value of -3. So let's look through. Okay, definitely not that one. Okay, we're looking for 1/2 and negative. Okay, those are the wrong signs, so it's not that one. So our answer for this one would be C, because we have 1/2 as our m or slope value and -3 as our y-intercept value. And it can show you as well what the line looks like for that one. Let's try the check number 2 on the top of the next page. So I encourage you to pause the video now, try it on your own, and then I will complete it for you. So please pause now and try this one on your own. So when we put in our values, again, we're substituting m, which is our slope. Our slope is 1/4. Okay, and our y-intercept is our b value, which is -6. So if I want to write it in this form, y equals 1/4x minus 6. Okay, because this was a -6 for that one. Now, we haven't come across a question like this yet. However, if we were given an equation and there was no b value given. So let's say the equation looked something like this. Y equals 1 over 4x. In this case, since we're not given a number, that means that our y-intercept is actually going to be at the origin, which is at 0, 0. Okay, so if they don't give you any sort of value here, positive or negative for a b value, you can assume that that means the y-intercept is at 0, or the origin. Okay, there is a question that will come up like that in the practice. That's why I'm mentioning that one right now. So let's take a look at example number 2 here. It asks us to use the slope and y-intercept to graph this line. So again, when we look at this y-intercept form, there's two pieces of information I'm given here. This value right here, that is my y-intercept. So remember, that means that when x equals 0, y is -2. So that's the one point we can start plotting. And this is my slope. Remember, slope is rise over run. So this one can be thought of in one of two ways. It can either be -5 over 4, or it can be 5 over -4. Okay, so you can, and I would actually suggest for these negative ones that you graph both versions of it. So the example is done here at the bottom. So I would always start by plotting my y-intercept first. And if you remember, my y-intercept was at -2. So I would go, okay, if my x is 0, y is -2. Okay, and then they wanted me to plot my slope. So in this case, I can go, if I'm going a +5 over a -4, I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up, and 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left, and then plot my point. Now, they don't give you room in this graph, unfortunately, but you also could do the opposite. You could go -5 over 4. In that case, you would go 5 down and 4 to the right, but they did not leave us enough room in this graph. Okay, so that's how you would do that example. So there is a check right here on the top of page 342. I will suggest the same thing as I did for the previous one. If you would like to pause now, try graphing this yourself, and then you can unpause the video and watch me work my way through the example. So pause the video right now, please. So we're going to use the slope and the y-intercept in order to graph this line on this graph that we were given. So remember, we're using the slope-intercept form. That means that the number 5 represents my slope. Okay, so now the slope, if it's a whole number, remember that the whole number can also be written as the whole number over 1. So in this case, I can write this as 5 over 1. That means my rise is 5, my run is 1. Now from the equation, I can see here that my y-intercept is a +2. So b equals 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by plotting my y-intercept. Remember, that means that x is 0 and my y is 2. That's the first point I'm going to plot. So here I'll go to when x is 0, y is +2. Okay, and then they want me to move 5 units up and 1 unit to the right because those are both positives. So I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up, 1 to the right. And again, they didn't leave me room in this graph, but I could also do the opposite because 5 over 1, a +5, can also mean a -5 over a -1. But in this case, they haven't left me the room to draw it. Last thing you should do is draw a line to connect your points. So I would, again, always suggest using some sort of straight edge. And then the other thing we can do is just include little lines at the bottom and top. That just shows that that line can go on. So that line can continue on both upwards and downwards on that graph. So let's take a look at example number 3 now, writing an equation given as a graph. So they want, writing an equation given a graph. So in this case, they've given me a picture they would like me to come up with the y-intercept form of this, or the equation for this. So I'm going to start with y equals, okay, so I think it'd be easiest to first find your y-intercept, okay? So let's see, where does the line cross? The vertical axes, it crosses at -1. So -1 is going to be the second part of my equation. That's my y-intercept, or my b value. And then from there, I can find my slope of the line. So you can choose the difference between any 2 points. I'll just use my x-intercept as that point. So from here, my rise is 1, 2, 3, and my run is 1. So my slope is 3/1, which we can simplify to say it's equal to 3. So let's finish the equation. Y equals 3x minus 1. So there you can see we have written this equation in y-intercept form just based on the graph. Now you could also check this equation by making a table of values, making sure that the points lie on that line as well. But I feel like most of you can follow this work pretty well and get the correct answer. So let's try the check on the next page, on page 343. So check number 1. I will suggest now that you pause the video, try this one on your own, and then I will fill in the answer. So please pause now, and I'm going to continue on and finish this question and put the answers in there for you. So even though it says from the graph, let's start with the rise over run, I like to start with the y-intercept first. So I'm going to take a look at this graph. Where does the line cross the y-axis or the vertical axis? Well, it crosses, this graph is going up by 1 for each, so it crosses at 2, 3, 4. So it crosses at a positive 4. Okay, so that means my b value is going to be a positive 4. And now from that, we can find our rise over our run. So our rise going to the next place is 1, 2. And my run, again, I'm just going to check the graph, and yeah, each of these values does represent 1, but always check your scale of the graph, because sometimes this graph, maybe each of these spaces represents 2 or 5. So always be sure to check the scale as you're working through these questions. Okay, so my rise was 2 and my run is 1, 2, 3. That means my slope is 2/3. So my m again was 2/3. My b value, or my y-intercept, was a positive 4. So let's put it into y-intercept form. Y equals 2/3x plus 4. Awesome. All right, so now I would encourage you to stop the video, work your way through the practice questions. They go from page 343 in the notes package that I've provided to you online, all the way to the end of page 345. After you're finished those pages, I would suggest that you go to the Google Classroom and check your own work to make sure that you're doing this properly. Hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.